Okay, folks, week 8. Getting down the wire. Only 2 more chapters after this. Whew. So, first off, agenda today, the usual questions, recaps, PowerPoints, breakout groups, a little comment on the assignment edit format due to some other comments I had, and we're going to start talking about week 10 and more Q&A. First off, anyone have any questions? What do you know? What are you thinking? What do you wonder about? I'll answer any questions as long as it's not about the election. What do you got? Any general questions before we delve into specific topic questions?
No. Is the final going to be similar to the midterm?
I'm not going to tell you that until week 10.
Gotcha.
Which is, on the agenda. I promise I'll address that part when we get to week 10 on the agenda. Other than the final, you guys have 2 more exciting lectures not counting tonight. You can't be talking about the final yet. Short answer is yes, it'll be exactly like the old one, except longer. But alrighty, so week 10, 7 recap. People did pretty well overall. Week 6, which is why I'm going to talk about week 10 later. People had trouble remembering to get back in the swing of things a bit after not having an assignment, but people did pretty well last week. All going on well. Any questions on last week? I still have do the second grading on the, not Etna, on Zeta, but I've gone through your first one and haven't decided to fail anybody on the class yet just because of that submission, but no. As usual, my plan is to do my second reading of everyone's assignments and should have Andy's here. Welcome, Andy. So tomorrow morning, you should see the grades on the assignment for last week. I've gone through them once. I have to read them again to make sure what I did the first time makes sense, which I do every week. So unless we have a major power outage or something, look for your grades on those assignments and the comments on them first thing in the morning. So, citing PowerPoints, scheduling operations. Now this is a class tonight that has elements that you'll see in lots of other courses. I know these 2 of you have had project management in here with me, and so you'll be familiar with the main thrust of this chapter really is the Gantt chart. And so we'll talk about that. I'm going to spend most of my time on the Gantt charts tonight, and I'll touch on some of the definitional stuffs and the capacity equations and that, which aren't huge. The Gantt chart is the thing that you really got to get down. As I will say multiple times tonight, no Gantt charts, not for the purposes of passing this course, but for the purposes of surviving the workplace, because they're everywhere and they're a staple. And they're either going to be created by you, influencing how you work, or you're going to have to be able to read and interpret them. You can't get away from Gantt charts in any industry. So, scheduling operations. Up to this point, we've been talking about all sorts of magic things about how the different considerations and constraints of materials and personnel went through that wonderful aggregate model at the last part of last week's chapter. And we've been talking, at this point, we've more or less been taking for granted that these things they're scheduled some magic way, if you will. We're just dealing with the scheduling and how things are ordered and how you create these marvelous processes to put in place. Now we're starting to talk about, well, how do you do it? How do you come up with this marvelous stuff that we've been analyzing up to this point without necessarily telling you how we get there? So now we're going to start to tell you a bit about what tools you use to get there, so you can get the processes in the place, scheduled as necessary, so you can accomplish what the process is trying to accomplish. Make sense to anybody? You can smile and nod even if it doesn't, but that's basically trying to take the mystery of organization that we've had so far and say, here are some good heuristics that we use to try and come up with ways of doing it. And this is, like a lot of these things come there, one of those areas where I consider it as much art as science. We have all sorts of tools you can use, but how you apply them is the tricky part. And there's more than one way to skin a cat in these things. So more detailed constrained decisions in your hierarchy, basically more detail, more things you have to deal with. But the idea is to get a time-phased plan by whatever time frame you care about, month, weeks, days, whatever. and how the resources you have available to you fit into that schedule. And this sort of outline here is all facing into the Gantt chart, which we'll get into momentarily. And you can always have trade-offs between conflicting objectives. Everyone always wants everything right all at once, but you only have so much machinery in the world. You only have so much lumber you can store at any one time. You don't have so many people you can pay at one time. Coming up with all these constraints that come into play that we have to trade off to come up with the optimal, you'll hear that term a lot, the optimal, maybe not the best, but the best you can do, essentially with optimal. Now then, we're going to talk again about batch scheduling. We've heard this come up since the second week of class. And for the purpose of this chapter, we're not dealing with that non-stop assembly line type of ideas as we approach scheduling. Remember, batch scheduling means we're going to do things in batches of something. Batches of computer components, batches of silicon wafers, batches of house framing supplies, batches of whatever. That there's going to be some non-continuous production line going on. And so this is where this chapter is so important for project management, because in the project management, by definition, it's going a specific project for a specific thing. A project has a beginning, middle, and an end, and you go on to a different project. As opposed to the old example I used of the Henry Ford production line, which is a continuous process. It just keeps going unless something interrupts it. And there's a breakdown. So we're dealing with that batch scheduling, which we've talked about so often before, where there's going to be a specific purpose and identifiable phase or process that we're doing. So this slide basically goes over the same things we've talked about in previous chapters, where people were waiting. There's a lot of waiting in batch processes because you've got different things scheduled. So a person at station 3 can't do their job until station 2 does their job, who can't do this job until station 1 does their job. And that becomes the artistry and the science of this, is how do you minimize the downtime of all these components that come in to create whatever process you need and make it go to fruition, so you have the least sort of slack time. So people aren't sitting around doing nothing, waiting for the person to finish their effort on the widget. And I say, typical actual work to be done is 5 to 20% of throughput. Remember, our throughput is that time to get that one object. Remember that question most people missed, throughput time. How many people want to bet I'm going to have a throughput question on the final? This could be analogous. That one was the most missed question. Maybe even 2. No, I don't have 2 yet, unless I can't find a good question for chapter 15. So, bottom line is they're saying there's a lot of wasted space time is what this actual work to be done is trying to say, that when you go through these batch processes, there's a lot of time where things just aren't happening. And that gets to your efficiencies that we talked about in previous chapters. And so that's what we're trying to do, is minimize the basically hanging around time that's wasted because no one's doing anything waiting for the previous process to happen. So batch job scheduling, again, this is a review of stuff we talked about before. Different types of jobs are being processed, different requirements for each type of job. You might need you be able to use the same machinery for different types of jobs, but no, you don't use exactly the same processes to make a chair versus a table versus an armoire. You might all be using lathes and drills and other types of sanding equipment, but that can be used in different ways for whatever batch job you're using for that piece of furniture. And so you've got constrained resources involved as always. So how do you get these things done, what needs to be done, so you can schedule things in an optimum fashion? And this brings us to where I'm going to spend most of my time tonight, in the Gantt chart. And I'm going to go through some of the examples from the book, basically. If you want to follow along, there's an example on page 249 where I take what they did and I just tweak it a little better in Excel, because though the example's not bad, I'm not a big fan of their sort of number line approach where they have this line that makes it hard to follow. So I'm going to redo this example with you in another fashion, which is actually very similar, because you've all read the book, to how they do the solve problems at the back of the chapter. So be able to take this, and when you learn how to do this in the way, you'll be able to go to that second, more advanced one on page 252, and it'll make more sense. Now, if you like the way the book does their pictures, perfect, you're ahead of the game. But then if I confuse you with my version of the example, I apologize, then you can ignore me and go back to what the book says. So the history of Gantt chart. This is one of my favorite movies on Gantt chart, and someone let me know if you can hear this, a wave when it starts.
In this video, I want to answer the question, what is a Gantt chart? The Gantt chart is arguably the most widely used project planning tool. In fact, it is so widely used that for some people, it's almost the archetype of what a project is all about. The Gantt chart is, if you like, the icon for project management. The Gantt chart was invented by Karol Adamiecki. Karol Adamiecki invented his harmonograph 5 to 10 years before Henry Gantt went into print, describing what is now known as the Gantt chart. And there is absolutely no evidence that I am aware of saying whether Gantt was either aware or not aware of Adamiecki's work. But it does emphasize something important, which is that if you want something named after you, the best thing to do is to write about it in English, because that way Americans and British people understand what you're writing about. If you write about it in Russian, as Adamiecki did, then it might not get noticed and picked up. That's just the way the world worked in the early 20th century. Anyway, Henry Gantt gives us the rules that we use for creating a Gantt chart. A Gantt chart plots time along the horizontal axis. And on the vertical axis, we list all the tasks that need to be done to accomplish our project. And if you've created a work breakdown structure, then that immediately gives you your task list. If you don't know what a work breakdown structure is, take a look at our video. What is a work breakdown structure?
Yeah.
Now, once you've created your graph, and here's something important about the way Gantt charts work, equal units of distance along the horizontal.
Hold on.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to mute Andy.
Axis represent equal units of time. Once you've created that, then you represent each activity by a bar, and the length of the bar represents the duration of the task. And the positioning of the bar represents the scheduling of the task. So if one task follows another, then the bar follows the previous bar. And so what we often see on our Gantt charts are these long diagonals of one activity following another in time, because each task is dependent upon the completion of the predecessor task to get started. But then we might have other work streams that run in parallel. The other commonly used symbol that you see on a Gantt chart is a simple geometrical shape like a triangle or a diamond that represents a milestone. And we have a video on what a milestone is as well. So that's your basic Gantt chart, and it's very easy to read, and we can put a vertical line through the Gantt chart to indicate today, so that at any point in time during our project we can read off where we should be in our project and then assess the level of completeness. Now, of course, when you look at real Gantt charts produced by sophisticated software, there are often different sorts of bars with different shading. There are sometimes different types of milestones, different shaped symbols. A milestone could be a decision point or a completion or a gateway review, for example. So how do you read these complicated Gantt charts? Well, my answer is it's simple. If you don't know what the symbols mean, that's not your fault. It's the fault of the person who created a Gantt chart. So when you create your Gantt charts, always be clear and put a key on the Gantt chart explaining what the different symbols and shadings and types of line mean. And that way your reader will be able to understand it very simply. So a Gantt chart, sometimes called a bar chart, represents your project plan by making each task into a bar and putting those bars onto a time schedule. Your Gantt chart is a powerful tool to help you think through your plan, to articulate it, to communicate it, and to monitor it during delivery. If you've enjoyed this video, please do give us a like.
Source of Gantt charts. So the one thing those of you who've had two of you have had my project management course, and you've seen this video before, but it's my favorite video about Gantt charts. So it goes. I have it in all three courses I teach in general management, project management, and operations management. So he reiterates what I said. It is probably the most important thing you will find, that's consistently used across businesses for different projects. And it fits into our context for this chapter for scheduling, because batch processes, as we've gone through them, are by their nature sort of mini projects, if you will, in your workshop. Your batch of doing your chairs versus a batch of doing your tables. Since batch products have a specific process that will be changed based on the next customer order or operational requirements of your company, it's all about projects, and that's why it fits in project management and in operations management, which get very, very closely linked. So, any questions on that before I go into the horrendous examples in the book? Actually, the good examples, I just like my pictures better. Okay, then, so you're all experts. Now then, here's the Gantt chart they use for that page 249 example when they're talking about, what are they making? I forget what they're trying to making. Did they tell us what they're making? No, just generic work center. So can't use a bigger example. This one, the example wholly is nice, but I don't like how they graphically represent it. It's confusing to me. And if it's confusing to me, it might be confusing you. If this works for you, doesn't mean you're getting something wrong. It's just, I tend to be a little more visually different than these lines. I don't like number lines in place of this. And as the nice chap in the video said, you have very intensive Microsoft projects, one you can get for free through the school. Well, they will do Gantt charts with you, and they can get as complicated or as simple as you like them. My one criticism of Microsoft Project, when you have my project management class, is that it starts off an nauseatingly integral amount of detail that gets very tedious to back out to have something that everyone can read. Gantt charts come in all sorts of colors. In addition to timing, they will also list responsibilities. And so I say it's important to know these things. Even if you never get in a position of having to create one, you'll be presented one that says, hey, Aaron, you do step 4 at this point. And Ray, you take over at 15 for part 2. And so if you don't understand how to read them well, your responsibility, and we talked about responsibility matrix earlier, it can be quite a hard way to try and look efficacious and wonderful to your bosses. So keep that in mind, that it's so important to understand these. If you don't get it in this class, and you take project management, master it in that class, and you take a general management class, there's almost no management class I teach other than ethics that doesn't have some form of Gantt chart in it. Even if we don't teach Gantt charts, there's always something in there. So, now then, this example gives you a work center with different types of machines, different types of situations, and an order that things must appear. And in this example, they give you, job order, and they admit it's arbitrary. The jobs have to be done in order 1, 4, 5, 2, 3. Why? They didn't tell us. They just had to start somewhere. And quite frankly, most people who often start in these types of processes, and this is why software can be both your best friend and worst enemy, can be great, because if you type in a whole bunch of processes and when you think you need to be done and what durations, software can be marvelous, and there's tons. I think one or two of you had on your software rundowns. There's usually someone always pull up something that has a process management software or a project management software that will say, okay, here's all your variables, and it will come out with a Gantt chart for you. Like all things, it's only as good as your estimates of durations and priorities. So there's only good, it's like any other system, it's a garbage in, garbage out type of possibility. So when it comes down to like these work center and machine hours in here, keep in mind that how do you know these things? The whole process will only be as good as the accuracy of those for different jobs. Now, if you're doing batch jobs on a regular basis, maybe you're making chairs twice a month, tables once a month, and armoires another time of the month, you might have done these jobs historically that you can come up with pretty good jobs or job estimates. And there is software in project management software and process management software. I use those two terms almost interchangeably. That will then help you come up with the estimates. I've got short video on an advertisement of a company at the end of this lecture that does that very things. There's tons of software out there that will help you figure out the scheduling for whatever you want, from silicon wafers to housing developments, which I used to use one called Timberline, which used to be out here just in Beaverton. And they had a beautiful costing management software that helped you figure out not only how much things would cost, but how much lumber you need per house and how long it would take to build on average. And then you would throw it into something like this, and then you would argue with it with your superintendent saying, hey, you can have it completed by Thursday. And he'll say, like Scotty, no way, it's going to take me twice as long as that. So what I did here is take, and if you want to look at Polymer 249 to compare to what I'm doing, or just stare at this, instead of using the nice lines, I basically threw it into Excel, and I'm happy to show the Excel file I did with this, because you might need it for your assignment this week. But if you want to use number lines, so I've got it on the agenda to talk about this week's assignment, as long as it's coherent and understandable, just like the video said, I don't care if you use blocks in Excel like this or draw number lines manually, as long as you can read it, understand it, and know what's going on. That's the key thing, because you'll be putting these things on PowerPoints in boardrooms to teach other people how to make your project successful. So, job one, I've color coded it on top of what they did in the book. So job one is blue. Why blue? Why not? Okay, job one is blue. Well, it tells you right there. We have 3 machines or work centers. What they're doing, we don't know for sure. If it makes you feel good to think that they're lathes or whatever it is, or some sort of metal machineries, or part of a batch process for microbrews. Now then, so it takes, for job one, it takes A2, and we're starting with job one. Why? Because the job order said so. We have A is 2 time periods. Do we know what the time periods are? For this example, no, but it could be days, could be weeks, could be hours in the day. It's whatever you need to have it to make sense, whatever project or batch you're doing. That's what determines the time. I once saw a Gantt chart for launch of a Saturn V rocket from the old Apollo days, and it went down by half seconds for the launch sequences. It was amazing. And this was done without our modern PCs. It was like, I wish I could get a copy of it, but I was thinking like, you're doing like half seconds and they had a half second decision-making probabilities. So A, from our little chart up here, is first. A takes 2, so we have 2 blocks of time on A. B, which can't take place until after A is completed. Why? That's just the mechanical nature of what you're doing. It's a high-level example. We don't know why B can't start until A is done, but whatever is required, maybe you can't make the legs until you cut the wood to make the legs for the chair. Whatever it is, B cannot take place until after A is completed. So B, which is 3 increments of time, starts after 2. A takes 2, goes to 2 time periods. So then B goes 3, 4, and 5. And that's where that 3 on the B is those 3 blue squares on the B. Similarly, we have this other work processes on C, which takes 4. But by definition, we can't do C until we've completed B. So the starting point for C is next square after the ending point of B. So we have 1, 2, 3. So we've mapped out in the Gantt chart the processes for job 1. Now, so isn't that easy? But we have a vibrant organization that can't just sit around letting pieces of equipment lay around all day long. We can't wait to get to job 2 until job 1's completely done. We want to get everything as done as much as possible, as fast as possible, so we don't pay workers just to sit around all day and do nothing. Because if the worker who knows how to do C, just sits around all day until the 6th hour of his shift, that's a lot of wasted time. So now we're going to start saying, let's layer job 2 on top of job 1. Any questions so far? No questions, so when I give you this on the test, no problems. So what I did is, job 4 is next, not job 2. Why? Because it says job order. Even though job 2 is next in line, it tells us job 4 is going next. Why? We don't know. They just told us to do it this way. Your manager came in and said, I like job 4 better than 2. So we kind of do the same thing, except on job 4, C has to come first. And it's 4 increments of time. Cool. Next in line is B, 3 increments of time. Now then, but you'll notice one thing here is that B doesn't start right when C stops. Why not? Who can tell me why not?
Resource or machines being used.
Absolutely, that's the start of it. Because if you look up here, B is currently in usage during period 5 by job 1. So the soonest we can put job 4 into production on process B is at time period 6 for 3 units of time. Let's just call them hours for the sake of argument. If it makes it, rather than units of time, sounds long-winded, we'll call them hours. They may be minutes, could be months, but until we finish B being used in the same time period, we can't use B simultaneously twice. So the soonest B can start for the second job is on period 6. It goes 1, 2, 3. Now when B is over, we go back to process A for 3 time period, 3 hours. Well, A isn't being used because A was used only 2 hours early in the morning. So for job 4, when B gets done, we can go straight into A on time period 9. There's no lag between them. So that's where we get it. So the next key thing is, to make this look really impressive, the top part of this slide, I've just overlapped jobs 1 and 4. So now you can see jobs 1 and 4 are here and here. All I've done this on this part up here, where you should see my arrow going back and forth. All I've done is combine those 2 charts. And when you combine them and they don't overlap, that's a good thing. Because the 2 colors aren't overlapping. If they're overlapping, then you gotta go back and say, oh, I made a mistake on the previous 2. So all I did is overlap them. Now, if you're really sharp, you can get used to doing this, you can do it all at once, but I've broken it down in little pieces. Next, we do job 5. Why? Because they told us. Management said we're doing in order of 1, 4, 5, the red one. It only uses 2 of the machines. So it takes A for 5 hours and B for 3 hours. Well, fortunately, we have a long downtime for machine A. So we can actually start working on the third job, i.e. job 5, as soon as we're done working on the first part for that job 1. Because we can just fill in the gap here, because that's blank, 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 and just put that first 5 periods right in there. Now the next thing it needs is B3. Well, we need process B. Process B is busy up until period 9. A is ready from a standpoint of, is ready for B 1 hour earlier, but the machine B is still being used for job 4. So we have to wait till that's over. Then, and that's why these two don't butt up, there's a blank spot in between. So we can put this up here, and it starts right on the back there. So essentially you'll have 1, 2, 3, 9 hours of continuous B processing time. Processing 3 different jobs, but back to back, going right on through. With me so far? Okay, 3 people I can see nodding, so I hope it works. So all I've done now is on that top Gantt chart, I now have overlaid job 1, 4, and 5, the first 3 jobs. So you can see how we're starting to fill in a bit here. So there's, and the whole object again is to have as little idle time as possible. So by being able to start job 5, even before 4 is over, but we can start the processes, we don't have workers just waiting around for several hours doing nothing. As opposed to saying, oh, we'll do all of job A, then we'll do all of job 4, or excuse me, all of job 1, then we'll do all of job 4, then all of job 5. And you take months to get this done. But we're filling in the gaps, whatever process is going to be done. So now we're going to job 2, the 4th job order. Once again, why? Because management said this is the order you do them in. So job 2 uses 2 processes. It has to start at process C, goes to process A, and doesn't need process B. 6 hours at process C. So when's the earliest time we can start in process C? Well, we go up to what we've done so far and say, wow, well, I guess hour 10, we can start process C for job 2. So, because we have this little white spot here. So that's when we start here. 6 hours, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And when that's done, excuse me, we can start process A. Well, ain't nothing going on process A since hour 11. So as soon as C is done for job 2, we can start at 16 right away for 4 hours, as it says right here. Cool. Now then, who wants to guess what we're going to do next? Who said overlap them again? All done this thing. Now we have jobs 1, 4, 5, and 2 overlapped as before with the other 3 jobs. Last remaining job is 3, because management likes to do this last. Process 3 starts, or job 3 starts with B, 3 hours. Well, the earliest time B becomes available for 3 hours is here. That's only 2 hours. The process 3 on that first B was only 1 hour. We could have started it way back here if it was 1 or 2 hours, but we did 3 hours of span. So the soonest we can start is in this spot. So B goes right there. Next thing is process C. Well, the earliest spot we have process C is here. We need 2 hours. We have 1 gap here for only 1 hour. That ain't enough. Okay, so then we got to stick it right here at hour 16. Cool. Now then, one last thing is A for 1. Well, because of the previous constraints, A isn't available again until here. There is a gap in here for one spot and a gap here for one spot, but you can't do A because B and C come first. So you have to wait till B and C are done. When B and C are done, the first period available is on spot 18, but A is busy, then A is busy on 19, so then you put it on 20. So closest place you can fit that 1 hour in that falls into the criteria of your process, which says B and C come first on job 3. So through the magic of Disney, we come up with the full Gantt chart for these processes or these jobs among these processes and machines. And so it overlaps in these ways. Other ways you might see things written out on here is some people would put, like numbers within here. Process one job might have put with A, put 1, 1 instead of colors, 1, 1, 1 to mark the job. There's all sorts of ways you can do these that make it more clear. I like to keep it simple. I have found out the hard way that when you have a manager who's colorblind with red and green, to avoid certain colors on these Gantt charts when you color code them. It sounds funny, but I was presenting this to my boss at Mentor Graphics once, and he said, I can't tell the difference between those three periods. I said, well, no, the one's for this, one's for this. No. He said, I can't see it. It all looks the same to him. So that's why whatever visual clues you can give, you don't want to embarrass your boss or anyone else by having to admit in front of people that they're colorblind. So whatever tools you can use, and this goes straight to that video, that will make this visually workable for your audience is what's okay. And like he said, we have an item here that says, here's what everything means. Now then, here you have a term, make span, which you'll hear again. That's basically, given what you're doing, what's the total time it's going to take? 20 hours to do all these things. That's the fancy make span term. You have a lot of idle time in between, but when you add up all what's going on, you start here, it takes you to 20. That's your make span. The span of which you are making things. Don't overcomplicate it. It takes you this long to make these jobs happen. Now, idle time is the other thing. A says 5. How do we get 5? Well, we go up to process A and say, wow, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 white spaces where nothing's being done. Process A is idle. Whoever's running process A is just drinking coffee, not doing anything. That's idle time. Similarly for B. B, we have white, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Got 8 hours of just coffee drinking for process B. 4 on process C. Well, you got 1 hour there, space 5, and 3 more idle spaces at 18, 19, 20. Idle hours are 4 on that. For this Gantt chart, what's the total machine idle time in hours? 17. People often get mixed up because they're like, start counting other things. It's not that hard, especially if you graph it. But people tend to overcomplicate it. Now then, wait time, delivering time. This is where they put the due date and what your delivery time is hours. How long does you have to wait to start to job 1? This is the waiting time in hours. 0, because we started 1 first. A was free, so you have no wait time to start A for job 1 here, which is blue. How long do you start at job 2? Well, job 2 is the green one. Bam, we had to wait 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours because of the job order we were given. Again, when people mess up on this example, it's because they get mixed up between the job order and job number. The job order has the job numbers in them. The order is when you start the jobs. And somehow I get people that get confused when you see it this way, because this is not telling you the order it should happen. It's saying we're just listing the jobs in numerical order. this job order over here tells you when you start them. And since 2 doesn't start until it's up 1, 2, 3, 4th in line, you've got 9 hours till you can start job 2. All the way down the line. But when you get down to job 4, there's only 1 hour that we're waiting for it. Job 4 is the gold. So, hey, we're golden, pardon the expression. Delivery time is when you're done. When is job 1 done? Well, it's done at 9 hours. When is job 2 done? 19 hours. Just line up to find that hour. When people get messed up on these, it's because they're trying to make it more complicated than it is. So it's not meant to be that complicated. As long as you can get your Gantt chart nicely organized, these numbers should drop out. And then you start worrying about how can you make it better? Because one of the examples they talk about in the book are how can you make this more efficient? And this is where software is really great, because you can stick all these parameters in you have from the work center machine hours and when they have to be done by. Well, software is wonderful and it'll give you the optimal working model for this without you having to say, okay, what happens if I move this over here and move that over here? Because you have delivery hours versus dates. So this job 1 may have a delivery hour of, 3 times 8, assuming it's an 8-hour schedule. Okay, that's 18 hours it's due. But you gave it 9. Cool. But that also creates a natural slough. Because if your due date is in 3 days, that's not 3 hours. This is where the book does a bad job on describing this. They go back and forth between days and hours sometimes. One of the projects in our breakout groups we're going to do today is you have to make sure you know that the due dates is in days, 8-hour days, but the job increments are in hours. When we get to that, we'll talk more. So is everyone wowed with my fantastic example compared to the book? Does it make sense to anyone?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to read than what the book had.
Cool. Now I can post this if you want, but it's in here. It'll be on recorded. No,
I wanted to ask what software you use to do that. To have
Excel.
Excel does that?
I'll show, hold on. Bear with me. I may have to unshut this, dude. I will show you. I'm gonna make sure I don't put up the answers. Okay, Gantt chart example. I threw this. Can everybody see my Excel spreadsheet sheet? I threw this into Excel and just I made everything 2 units wide and just did it with nice, pretty colors. And I highlighted that and pasted it into PowerPoint. Again, I use, I don't do a lot of this project management anymore. Again, there's a nauseating amount of software applications out there to help you do this. Project is the one that gets used most, Microsoft Project, because it's so cheap and free, and they give it to universities.
You can have it automatically find the best time frame for everything?
Yes, if you give it the right criteria, it'll whoosh for you.
Oh, that's cool.
And I always tell students is when you use these programs, always take it with a grain of salt, because again, it's only as good as the inputs, and your inputs in this case are these work center hours. The result will be only as good as those work center hours. If you need to add some slough, okay, but the more slough you add to give you extra, potential space and contingencies, well, that's more idle time, and more idle time is more money that's wasted. So, but I just did in Excel. Most of the stuff I do nowadays, I can do in Excel. It's one thing I don't like about Project, which is we tend to use Project in this school because Microsoft gives it for free. Because they want you to start using Microsoft Project. So that's what you know when you graduate and go out into the world and you tell your bosses, I want to use Microsoft Project. I'm not saying it's bad. It's a little more cumbersome than most for my taste. And I don't like its Gantt charts because they will do everything in the world you want. And this is where I pontificate. My biggest complaint about Microsoft software is it tries to do too much for you. And the hardest thing about Microsoft software is backing out what it's trying to do for you automatically. When you've used multiple different types of versions of this, that makes more sense. But project is one. When you take a project management class, most often we use project management software called Microsoft Project because we can get it for 6 months for free for you when you take it. Free is always good because these projects softwares can get very expensive. They will also customize for you. There's project software made for industry specific types of organizations, for construction, for machine shops, for high-end people processes, for office automations, things like that. There's tons of project industry specific applications out there. Use what you know, but for me, again, I use Excel, and when we talk about this week's assignment, we can talk about what you want to use for one of the Gantt charts you have to create. But this is how I did it. And I'm happy to post this out there. You can stare at it, take what you like about it, use it, burn it, whatever you feel like. So let's get back. Any more questions about that? Cool, press on. We're zipping through this tonight. So the big conclusions, as you saw in that, it's highly sequence dependent on batch jobs. You get those different A, B, and C. Could have been machinery, it could have been people, it could be whatever, buildings, vehicles, whatever it is. It's sequence dependent because the resources have a limited ability to be used simultaneously. If you only got one drill bit, you got to wait till the other job's done with that drill bit before you can use a new drill bit. And this is where the example, I didn't do this one in the detail for you, but that example on page 252, they use the previous example, one we just went over, and say, okay, what happens if we buy an extra machine A and an extra machine B and an extra machine C? What difference does that make on our processing times, and is it worth it? So that next example does the exact same thing we've just been through, except doubles the amount of resources for each type and how that changes your time. And this is part of an operations management thing where you go through these types of operations and say, well, would it help if I bought one new machine of every one A, B, and C for this process and bought another extra one? Or would it only help more if I just bought one extra B to speed things up, or one extra C and a B? And those are the questions that operations management gets into, is running different permutations on this type of Gantt chart and saying, okay, where's my biggest bang for the buck? Because I don't have infinite money. I can only buy one more employee or one more machine. So does it work if I buy an extra B? Or do I really feel that C is going to hold me up the most? So maybe I buy just a C, and you can experiment in that to try and figure out, well, what can I do to make it more efficient, rather than just automatically assuming, like in the second example on 252, that I'll just buy one more of each. Because in businesses, money don't grow on trees. You got to make your best job. And so waiting time depends on job interference. And essentially they're saying job interference, they mean when the jobs couldn't overlap, waiting for one other job to be done before the other. That's the job interference. And so again, it's a bit of an art form, but you've got good methodologies and good software to help you through this. But actually, I hate to say it, from a project manager, doing project management work, it was actually one of the more fun things to do. And people, when I say that, a lot of people say, like, you're insane. Do you also like to pull wings off flies and watch them sink in water? No, but it's an artistry to it, and figuring out the right way to get these things so they work. Maybe I'm a little more weird than the average Joe on this, but I actually love figuring out these nuances and how to work these batch, and where I could just optimize the resources and figure out, okay, I'll add one more of this or one more person, how you do it. It was one of the more fun things for me. But that's me. Now the next thing that talks about theory of constraints. And the theory of constraints, which is one of those great things where people write all sorts of theses about this for different industries. And I sum it up, and other professors may say, no, don't talk about it that way. But you've got only so much stuff in the universe to do what you need to do with it. And there are limitations of resources in yours. So the theory of constraints is basically saying, hey, you got this much coming in it, you got this much coming out of it, and you got this much you can have in the middle of it. How do you make it all go through this organization to go and use the word throughput as always? So here's one of my favorite 1-minute definitions.
Hello Fiona, can I explain any management concepts?
Professor Siegfried, can you explain the theory of constraints, TOC?
Well Fiona, the theory of constraints, TOC, is a management paradigm that views any manageable system as being limited in achieving more of its goals by a very small number of constraints. There is always at least one constraint, and TOC uses a focusing process to identify the constraint and restructure the rest of the organization around it.
Professor, can you give examples of constraints?
Well Fiona, examples of internal constraints are as follows. 1. Equipment. The way equipment is currently used limits the ability of the system to produce more saleable goods and services. 2. People. Lack of skilled people limits the system. Mental models held by people can cause behavior that becomes a constraint. 3. Policy. A written or unwritten policy prevents the system from making more.
Thanks, Professor, for explaining internal constraints.
So now you're all experts. Okay, so hey, propose, fairly recently in that, but basically it's where you're going with what you have. And the one thing they put in there, which is why this theory gets written about so much, is the third one he just blops over, which is like policies and management. And I don't want to sound like Karl Marx manifesto, but the management issues are one of the biggest things I've encountered that constrain the ability of processes to go forward. People have preferences, ideas. They're doing it the same way they did when they were on the front lines, and now they're in the management office and they know how to work it still. This is one of the reasons why they have so much emphasis nowadays on, especially on quality circles and things like that, which became a big thing in the 70s in auto manufacturing, in lean processes, which we skipped that chapter, but when lean comes down to, as an organization, you involve people top to bottom of what's going on. This is that sort of poke yoke, so in my days you say poke yoke, but getting people involved who understand what's going on, who can stop the processes, engineering the process start to finish to minimize errors and waste. It tends to be one of those, oh, we've always done it this way. Why? Stop now. It's worked before. The management aspects of it are the biggest things I see as elements that are hard to address, especially if it's your bosses. And it can be politically damaging, but it's when I look at things people write about papers on theory of constraints, the biggest issue they focus on are management and managing issues. It's easy to buy a new lathe, it's easy to buy a new piece of equipment, but changing the minds and mindsets of organizations are the hardest things that impact this in a negative fashion. Long-winded, but just be prepared for it as you go out there. So a couple of things as we're going to talk about this, and some of this we already know, but elements of this. This one thing I love this is production does not have value until it is sold. And this will get very important when we talk about inventories coming up in the next chapter. I think is it next week? Inventory is next week. I think inventory is 14. Because it's sort of having a warehouse filled with stuff people doesn't want to buy is not valuable. And even the IRS has started getting to this and saying, well, okay, you may have a warehouse filled with fantastic 8-track tape players. And you may have documented what it took to manufacture them. No one wants it. It has no value. And you can use that diminished value in your finances. So it's a philosophical thing though, because people say, oh, I've got this great, it's like the people used to say having stocks is really great, but you don't really get the value of the stock until you sell it or buy it. It's the buying and selling of that that makes stock valuable. Otherwise, it's a piece of paper that you have on the wall, or when you used to get physical pieces of paper. Now you get a key number. But that's the sort of, you want to make money from the operations of this, as it says, because just having inventory doesn't do anything. So raw materials do have values to a certain extent, but the operating expenses we're going to layer into this, the cost of labor and overhead, are going to hit us really hard. You say, how? Well, now then, anything that slows down a production, a bottleneck, machine and workstation procurement system, we already know this, but you all know that bottleneck determines the capacity of the system, going back to chapter 2 and 3. That's where theory constraints talks about this. And the operations manager, which you're all going to be experts in this course, should focus on the bottleneck to increase capacity and throughput. What I said before, when the bottleneck's management, you have issues. They're hard. Don't assume this is just physical capacity of some piece of machinery or people. I should talk about the Hawthorne effect on this one. Bottleneck should be scheduled to achieve maximum throughput. Yes, that's nothing new. That's what most of this we've already talked about. Non-bottleneck should be scheduled to keep the bottleneck busy. Work and process queue should always be in front of the bottleneck. Yep. Meaning the stuff that's waiting to be done is in front of the bottleneck. Think of that flow chart we've done where you have a bottleneck. Work and process is something that's in the middle of being made into something else that you can sell. Well, by definition, it should be waiting for the bottleneck to clear so it can finish manufacturing, not be waiting for something else to happen on the other side of the bottleneck. So non-bottleneck resources may be idle. This is what you see in the Gantt charts. And the final one is the, well, duh. This is straight out of the book. Find ways to reduce the bottleneck. That's what operations management specialists do. Whatever that bottleneck may take the form of. So, we're going to talk about a few key terms in here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but they will come up. So just be aware of them, and I guarantee there's going to be questions on this. What jobs should we process next? And this is that magic decision-making of the Gantt chart. Remember when they said, here's the job order we're going to do. They just gave it to us arbitrarily for the example. But how you select what jobs should be done for what priority is key for you setting up that process that you can map out in that nice Gantt chart with pretty colors. That's the old shape of unit. That's the rub here, is what scheduling. You've got to look at when it's due, your resource availability, and figure out what do I do first. That's why some of the in the back of the book and the examples they do in the book. And can you reorder this in a way to make it sooner? Can you make it go from 36 to 33 hours, whatever it takes? So common use and service, first come, first served. Whoever shows up in line first gets it. Whether they're going to take 10 hours to solve their problem or 2, they came in first. How many people have been in line at Home Depot or Lowe's when the person trying to help you suddenly says, oh wait, just a minute, let me help this person because you need some custom lumber. And they suddenly say, wait, Ray, weren't you the one that said you worked at Home Depot? Or was it Lowe's?
Worked there for 4 years. I know exactly what you're referring to. Exactly.
You might have a person who needs 12 gallons of custom-made paint done in different version each, versus this person just needs to be pointed to where the lacquer is. So you might say that person who wants the 10, 12 gallons, can you be just a moment? They were here first, but I just need to point to where the lacquer is for this person. Versus having that person wait there for 4 hours while you mix this guy's paint, waiting just to be told where the lacquer is, and you've lost a customer. Not an extreme idea, but it's something we experience all the time. You might experience that at the grocery store. I had in the butcher's office the other day when I had a quick question about something, but this lady knew exactly what she wanted. Oh, I was happy to let her go first. Okay, she just knew that she wanted the little teriyaki chicken skewers in New Seasons. I had a question about how do I get buffalo meat. Okay, I waited 60 seconds and we didn't have a bottleneck. I would have created a bottleneck if I sit there and say, I want to tackle you for 10 minutes about why we don't have buffalo anymore, where I can get some, because it's really healthy compared to everything else that's red. So these are the types of things you have to decide what's in your best interest to do it. And from a policy standpoint, how you give your employees instructions to make this happen. Again, there's no one steadfast rule, but if you get anything from this is to ask the right questions. You know, this course, that's the biggest thing you can come out of this course is to, you're not necessarily going to have magic ways to solve every problem. But I'm hoping you can come away from this saying, hey, at least I know what questions I should be asking and get the problems there. Because there's all sorts of ways we can tell you to go at a problem here, but each is going to be unique in some fashion, but being able to understand the nature of the different permutations you need to worry about and the resources you need to worry about. Now then, critical ratio, this is something you'll hear too. Massively hard math here. Remaining time until it's due compared to the remaining processing time to go. Critical ratio, because you want to know whether you're going to be late. Bottom line is, if you got 2 days to the due date and 5 days till it's processed, you got 2 over 5. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Bad.
Well, it's due in 2 days, but it takes you 5 more days to do it. Bad. So you can start seeing these questions maybe might formulate where a critical ratio of 110% is good or bad compared to a critical ratio of 50%. If there's lots of time remaining until the due date compared to only a little bit of time until it's done processing, that means one thing versus another on critical ratios. So you get those like over 100% versus less than 100%, or over 1 versus less than 1 type of questions. It's a critical processing ratio of 5 better than a critical processing ratio of 0.5. You'll see these, and this actually, the critical ratio is something that comes up a lot. I don't never use a lot myself, but it is a legitimate term out there you'll see in canned reports. And that's what when they talk about critical ratio, that's what they're talking about. So, planning control systems. Zipping through this, you guys have no questions. I'm actually finished before 9 o'clock tonight. So, what's reasonable to promise delivery dates? Do you promise the world to the customer and have it not work out? And have your people hate you? I've had salespeople that have done that in my area say, well, oh yes, we got this contract. I told them we have it ready by March. And it's like, by March? We don't have a process design in yet. And it's February. So coordinating how your process is in place internally to make sure these can work. You have your Gantt charts to show what is reasonable. Figuring out bottlenecks, and again, where each activity should be started and stopped. What permutations will come in play to say it's going to be complete or not. This is where, of course, I'm teaching next week, or next term, we go into very much gets into this. What are the probability that you're actually going to do what you do when you say you're going to do it? What are the odds you can actually make your ideas? And this whole list of little things here, you need to go back and think to what we talked about in chapter 1, where who determines the quality of what you're producing? Is it the person making it?
It's gonna be the person who utilizes it, purchases it.
Yeah, Ray gets the gold star today. Yes, it's customer driven. So how can you get this done? Because if you don't do these things when they're needed, the quality in one sense doesn't matter. Local bride, years ago when my sister was getting married, and the shop went out of business because they had a terrible time getting wedding dresses made on time. And when you're in there for your final fitting, and I was in there with my sister, when it was wrong, and they could have it ready in a week, and it was only 2 days before the wedding for this final fitting. That had a very customer impact. And then I remember this young lady in the next booth who was literally in tears because her wedding dress wasn't ready in time. They went out of business a year later. A little bit of Gantt charting. What processes are made to make this? Think about all those processes we talked about where the customer interaction hits first. In customized tailoring, there's two spots. One where the customer says, hey, I want this suit. Measure me for this suit. I want it gray and blue. And this is either a custom or a batch job. They have another customer contact at the end where they're picking it up. All these things have timing aspects of it. Know your resources and what it's going to take. Do you need to hire extra people, more skill levels, whatever it takes to make these things happen. Okay. Here's a quick, this is actually an advertisement. I'm not plugging for these people, but it goes over the types of things we're talking about where you get software and vendors who do all these things for you for a price. But it's actually a good version.
Using time-consuming and error-prone spreadsheet scheduling? Are you struggling to change and losing business as a result? Introducing our Access Production Planning and Scheduling solution. Intelligent software allows you to manage orders, optimize labor and machine resources, allowing in-depth cost-effective planning. Up-to-date information is critical, from what's happening on the shop floor to the what-ifs of taking on a new order. Access provides drag-and-drop tools to intelligently plan, schedule and predict outcomes. All are easily factored in, meeting even the toughest delivery deadlines. Today's planning and scheduling can be the winning component in your supply chain. More than 2,000 UK supply chain operators use Access to improve their performance and profitability, gain competitive advantage, and drive growth through improved business insight. Get in touch. Yes.
Now, what I love about that commercial is it mentions just about every definitional term we've used in this chapter or in this book so far. And there are people who are willing to do this for you, and it's big business doing operations management for people. So, I'm going to breakout room times. Who needs a short break? Anyone besides me? No one wants one, so I'm going to make you take one. Let's come back at like 20 after. There's a good chance we'll get out of here early. All right, I'll make the executive decision saying, all right, just take 10 minutes. I'll see you at 20 after.